4 months after the last Ontario provincial election, it seemed like Doug Ford was unstoppable. His popularity was holding steady and even rising. But fast forward to today, and almost every major pollster agrees that his approval rating is underwater. Abacus data shows his approval rating is -12, which essentially means that 12% more people don't like him than like him. And over 70% of people say that it's time for a change in government. And a recent liaison poll actually shows the Liberals in the lead. So how did we get here? Let's take a look. There are a few main reasons as to why, in my opinion, this major polling shift has taken place. The first of these that should not go without mentioning are the very sudden, unexpected, and large repertoire of controversies he's taken on in like the last 30 days. The two of the biggest being with regards to his private jet, which he purchased for $30 million and then backtracked on. The reason this controversy was so big was not necessarily because he was getting a private jet, as much as it was the fact that he had run on basically being the only premier, the only political leader that was not flying a private jet, that still drove his car around. He bragged about this sort of thing. And then fast forward 8 years later, when the economy is worse, he decided that this was the time to take taxpayer dollars to buy his private jet. And I'm actually not against people having private jets if that's what they need to get around more effectively. But he actively promised that he wasn't going to get one. He bragged about not having one. And then as the economy gets worse, especially in Ontario, thank the Lord I no longer live in Ontario, but as the economy gets worse in Ontario, that's when he decides to take $30 million taxpayer dollars to buy this private jet. The second of these controversies has to do with the Freedom of Information Act, an act that basically, well, up until recently, has allowed the public to view all sorts of records from within the governmental caucuses. But Doug Ford made the decision recently to remove records of the Premier, his cabinet, and his assistants from the Freedom of Information Act, which has rubbed many, many people as being an incredibly shady move. A couple of these controversies with some major protests that have been going on, opposing the Ontario Progressive Conservative government. And it's safe to say that things are looking a little shaky for him right now. But I'll be honest, the majority of people, the broader public, tends not to really care about these sorts of controversies. I find in my experience researching various different political careers that these sorts of controversies rarely explain such a large polling drop in such a short amount of time nonetheless. They may have an effect, but rarely this big, so there's something else going on here. I mean, 338 Canada is showing that the gap between the Progressive Conservatives and the Ontario Liberals has dropped 9 points just since the end of March. I'm sorry, but you can't convince me that that many people are paying that much attention to these controversies. So in my opinion, there are a couple major factors as to why these controversies have affected the public opinion so much, far more than usual. The first of these is simply the fact that Premier Doug Ford has been Premier for 8 years. If he was to finish his term, he will be Premier for 11 years. And history shows that the longer someone's in office, the harder it is for them to stay there, because it simply gets too hard to convince people to keep voting for them. Almost all of our longest-serving leaders in Canada on a federal level and on a provincial level have been benefited by outside factors. For example, our longest-serving Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, he served for 21 years, and he was greatly benefited. He greatly benefited from World War II and the Great Depression. Without those two things, it's highly unlikely he would have served for that long. He lost the election in 1930, and I think in 1925 or 26 as well. It's highly unlikely he would have served for that long, but the two external crises greatly benefited him. And there's data to support this in Doug Ford's case as well. According to Abacus data, his approval rating has actually been slowly declining already since last summer, and a poll from Abacus from January of this year showed that about 70% of people already, before any of these controversies, agreed it was time for a change in the Ontario government, which is about the same as the amount of people in the most recent poll. But don't click off just yet, because there's a couple more factors that I want to go over that I think could greatly explain why this shift has been so sudden. But the first of these next few factors is Bonnie Crombie's resignation. When she got less than 60% of approval from her own Liberal caucus, I think she got 57% to be exact, safe to say she's not the most popular among Liberals, despite increasing their seat count in the last election. But now that she's gone, a lot of the opposition to Doug Ford's policies has naturally coalesced around the Liberals. Because when a party doesn't have a leader, the negative is that, well, they don't have a leader, so maybe they don't have a clear message. But the benefit is that because they don't have a clear message or a clear personality, almost anyone can kind of project what they think that party's about onto the party. And in my opinion, that's what's happening here. You have a lot of people from business liberals to far left socialists coming together, kind of projecting what they view the party's about onto it because it doesn't have a leader. And a lot of the opposition to Doug Ford's policies is just naturally gravitating towards that party, despite not having a leader, because they're just projecting their own beliefs onto it. Just going, oh, this party sucks. This party's doing things I don't like. Okay, I'm just going to go with this one anyway. And this leads me to two more reasons as to why these controversies are affecting Doug Ford more than they otherwise would. The first of these is that Doug Ford is not really a conservative policy-wise. His policies have consistently been center-left, whether it be fiscally, when he's running these big deficits, or socially with his lack of attention to the sort of liberal agenda in schools, which schools are a provincial issue. So you have a lot of conservatives that, especially ones I know, that feel frankly very frustrated with the progressive conservative government in Ontario because there's no real other conservative option for conservatives. So you have all these different people coalescing around the Liberals because they don't like Doug Ford, and in response, Doug Ford has almost nobody to back him up because all the real conservatives don't want to support him. But then on top of that, Doug Ford, it has for the last few months also felt very directionless, with no real big campaign moves, no real big campaign strategy. He was sort of the anti-Donald Trump guy in the last election, and then it kind of feels like he just sort of dropped that. So in other words, you have this situation where Doug Ford stayed afloat because of centrists or kind of business liberals or what have you. But now, because of these recent actions, they've all shifted, or a lot of them have shifted, to the Ontario Liberals kind of projecting what they feel that party's about onto them, or just saying that they would vote Liberal because they don't like Doug Ford. And then Doug Ford alternatively has nobody to back him up because he's already pushed the sort of far-right vote away from him. And it's because of these very specific combination of factors that I believe, in my opinion, that explains this 9-point polling drop, at least according to Abacus 338 Canada, which is an aggregation of polls rather than a poll itself, to be clear. But will Doug Ford recover, or will he just continue to sink? That's the question. And a big part of that, whatever the result is of the next Ontario election, will be who the next Liberal leader is. And not just who the next Liberal leader is, but their resume, their experience, and, more importantly, what they choose to do. How good will their campaign strategy be? Well, I'll always be here to keep you guys informed as often as I can. And in the meantime, feel free to subscribe and like the video. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. All right. Have a good one. Bye now.